I'll let the researchers respond or sum up at the end, but use most of this time now available to allow other people to ask questions and to join in. So your hand was up first. We'll have you first. Yeah.
Mohammed Amin, I haven't read the report, but obviously I've listened to all the discussion. And everything has focused on Muslims as members of organized Muslim groups. What research did you do on Muslim participation in governance, looking at Muslims as individuals? Obviously you mentioned Muslim parliamentarians, but what data did you gather about Muslims as elected councillors, Muslims as members of political parties, Muslims as members of governance bodies of universities, health trusts, other quangos, etc.?
Thank you. I'd like to take a number of questions together, so we'll address that in a minute. Yes, you with the green shirt.
Hi. I really appreciate the report you have done, and what struck me is at the conclusion you said that human rights breaches done on Muslims and that's still outstanding, and number of people in detention is rising, and half of the immigration detainees are Muslims, or more than half. That shows what's in there. And what I don't like about it, the whole thing seems to be New Labour, many mechanism behind it. New Labour is the one who's got the blood on their hand. Blair government is the one who sexed up dossier to say they're 45 minutes, and that caused millions of Muslims' life. So this should not be an issue of New Labour or Labour. As a Muslims, we could be anybody. And I think all the conservatives might not be doing what they're meant to be doing, but they are the one who do not have the blood on their hand right now. I'm not a conservative supporter, but what I'm saying is in combination, they're reducing the war in the world. On the other hand, New Labour was the one who's creative of the world. Thank you.
Is there anyone else who'd... Yeah, Fawzia.
Hi, thank you for the report. I haven't had a chance to read through it in any detail, but I just want to take up the point that Humera made about the gender dimension, because obviously there was the National Muslim Women's group, which was...
Is your microphone on? You don't sound very loud.
I don't know. But anyway, the issue of the women's organisations and the gender dimension to the public policy debate. Obviously, there's a very key discourse around how men and Muslim women are viewed in terms of policy, and I wondered if any of that came out in the interviews. And I was just looking through the lists, and there weren't any particular gendered or people who work within the gendered area of public policy. So I was just wondering if that was a key issue that came through, and also if you could say something about the in terms of methodology. What sort of questions were you asking respondents? Because I mean, I haven't. Maybe it's in the report, and I haven't had a chance to find it. But I'd be quite interested in knowing what kinds of issues you covered during the interviews.
Okay, well, we'll have more questions in a minute, but should we take those three first? Would you, one or both of you, like to take some of those?
Well, first of all, thank you very much to all of you and to the panellists for that feedback. And I suppose I'd like first to respond to Humera's critical notes about what's not there in the report. And I'd certainly agree with you. I think that is an important absence. And all I'd like to say is that this isn't the end of our writing and reporting about this research. So that is one of the topics that will feature in Public Spirit. That's what we have planned for next year, because I think it is an extremely important issue. But I take the point that its absence in this report it's a notable absence. But in terms of the way that you've been reported here in the report and in the way that you've been characterised, I hope one of the points that does stick from the way that we reported you is the ways in which to be involved in Prevent types initiatives is not necessarily to be equated with being co-opted. So I think the quote that we got from you and also from other actors shows that this isn't a simple story of Prevent operating deeply problematic logics in which Muslim civil society actors are being passively worked upon, but that people were participating and responding to Prevent in ways in which they were clearly setting out the terms of their engagement and the conditions of their participation in something like Prevent. So I thought it was important to note that in this kind of general story that we've been trying to tell about Muslim agency. So that's the kind of message that we were trying to communicate with that. And also, a range of other actors, such as the points made by Abdul Haq Baker from Street. So that there is, a kind of, I hope, a more complex story to be told about the impact of Prevent and the terms in which Muslims responded to the Prevent agenda. Just turning to, I'm not sure if I can cover all of the questions, but just turning to the question about is there a kind of, Dilawaz's point about, is there a way of responding to the problem without becoming an agent of government? And I think that's something that we were talking about earlier in our conversations today. But so I'd like to flag that there's an interesting example of this from one of our case study areas in Birmingham, where there are a group of self-organised community activists who have come up with their own alternative Prevent programme, which looks very, very different to the government's version of Prevent. So there are, I think, alternative ways of conceptualising how do you respond to those kinds of issues. And by the way, I should think the most important point, perhaps the one that might interest the questioner there, is that this alternative version of Prevent is one which deals very squarely with issues of foreign policy and looks at that as an important factor in people's responses to violent extremism, for example. In terms of our focus on civil society organisations, I think that's kind of inevitable in terms of the analysis of Muslim participation in governance, in that many people are involved in governance speaking for particular bodies. But I wouldn't say that all of our respondents came as representatives of particular kinds of groups or organisations. So there are among our sample, I think, people who perhaps would see themselves more as advisors of, with particular kinds of specialist expertise, rather than speaking on behalf of a particular kind of organisation or as a member, for instance, of an umbrella body. So I should think the sample reflects high degrees of group membership, but it's not totally about group membership.
I want to respond. It's a much more fundamental question and challenge I have. You are totally focused on Muslim participation as if it is only expressed through Muslim organizations. And what I'm curious about is your complete lack of research as Muslims, as individuals participating in the governance of our society. It matters that we now have 8 Muslim members of parliament. It matters that we have whatever number of Muslim members of the House of Lords. I'm curious how many Muslim councillors we have elected, because each of these, as an individual human being who is a Muslim, is participating in governance. And I reject this obsession with civil society organizations.
Well, yeah, actually, if I could begin to respond to that, because this is our study has been about the ways in which the government has engaged with Muslims as Muslims, to a large extent. Because that was a major prong of New Labour's engagement with Muslims, and it continues to be a way in which at the local level many things do still happen. So the 3 policy fields which we've laid out are ways in which Muslims through activism have tried to work for equalities legislation, have tried to unite with each other, ways in which the government tried to engage with Muslims through the Prevent agenda, and ways in which faith groups are considered representative in different respects. But we have found a key and essential shift, of course, with the new government, with the conservative-led coalition government, which is to speak more in terms of an individual basis, in terms of relationship, and less on a group basis. So there is no recognized group which is representing Muslims in any respect now. There is a set of there's a Muslim leadership panel, which is sort of an ad hoc group of people who have been chosen for different reasons who are able to advise to government. But that's not very much is known about that. It's actually quite, it's something which we really need to know more public information about, that kind of representative system. At the same time, though, we do have a lot of local councillors who are part of our study. We do have the figures about how many local councillors there are and parliamentarians. We are trying to map out these changes because it is definitely a shifting landscape, as you're saying. To answer a question which was asked before, to sort of tie in from this, our study asked many different types of questions. We asked about ways in which people have been involved in participatory forums and consultative forums and those sorts of engagement activities. There's sort of thoughts about faith in public life, including if they think that Muslims should be engaged with as a group. So we've got a lot of information to sort of work through about different perspectives on that. We've also asked questions about these specific policy fields, and these people are experts in those fields. And then the final area which we asked was about personal life and personal approaches to faith or to philosophy or whatever somebody's perspective is. One thing that was very interesting about that, about people as individuals, is that many of the people on our list who are not faith actors, who are politicians, actually have stronger faith identities than perhaps a few of the, quote, Muslim actors do. So there's a lot of individual variation in the way that people approach religion in public life, and that's often what motivates them to get engaged in these types of issues.
The list on page 68 of the people we interviewed includes a lot of members of parliament and former cabinet people, including Sadiq Khan. We invited Baroness Farsi on more than one occasion to be interviewed, in fact to participate in our events and so on, but she was always too busy. So, you know, we understand the point you're making. It looks like you've got an opportunity. Shall we say a minute?
Okay. First of all, I'll say that it is a good report. I don't know if I said that strongly enough. What I said was it's a dense report. It needs a lot of reading because it does cover a wide spectrum of things. And I will read it again a few times, I think. And I look forward to that. I just wanted to say for my little bit about Muslim individuals. I think Muslim individuals, prior to maybe some of the positive action that's been happening recently, they've not really been represented in the mainstream as individuals. They're there, you know, they've been doing their thing, but they didn't necessarily make being Muslim an issue for them. So someone who's a Muslim has every right to do whatever they want and achieve whatever they want. If they don't put being a Muslim there as being important, that's their right, and people have been successful that way. But as soon as you say Muslim politicians, you're putting, for example, you're putting Muslim as part of the matrix. And I think the thing is, when people are there, as Sadiq Khan has said, I think it's in the report, that he's not there to represent only Muslims. He's a Muslim and that impacts on him, but he's there to represent all his constituents, right? You judge, as a Muslim, I judge him as I would judge any politician. So for me, as an ordinary person in the street, him being Muslim is irrelevant until I find that he makes himself relevant. And I find often non-Muslims can be more relevant in the public arena, in politics, than Muslims necessarily. So I think as individuals, Muslims have a right to do everything. They speak for themselves, they can do, and they do, right? But the issue of communities is something different. If you want to understand communities, the diversity in the Muslim community, you've got to have people who understand how they tick. And if you want to deal with, if they have issues that need to be dealt with, somebody, for example, a lot of the people who are going around as Muslim experts have never worked on the ground. And the significant difference, as Maliha was sort of saying with the processes, is that if you are working in the field, let's say, of age elderly, that the elderly, you would not find somebody inexperienced on the issue of the elderly speaking on behalf of the elderly. But we have a lot of people speaking on Muslims who have never worked on the ground on Muslims, and sometimes have contempt of Muslims even, right? So this precedent has been set by last government and continues with this government.
Thank you, Humaira. Abdul Aziz, you'd like to make a comment or ask a question?
Okay, thanks. Yes, I was just interested in the way that you framed this finding about the government moving away from taking the all-leader approach. And I think I agree with the way you framed it, but I think there is another side to that, which is something that I witnessed quite a bit when I was in government, which is that government also often played this game of divide and rule. So it may be moving away from one way of doing things, which is taking the leader, but it was falling into another way of doing things, which was quite beneficial to Muslims. And we saw a lot of that with regards to funding, with regards to providing around the consultation paper. So I think there's more in it. There's more in it that could be explored than just this idea that taking it to your leader or moving away from that was a wholly positive. I think there is also something that the Muslim community loses by not having the equivalent of a chief rabbi, or by not having, right now, the equivalent of a board of deputies. I think the idea that the Muslim Council of Britain should be the only organization that government speaks to, I don't think it's worked. I think lots of organizations, lots of people in the Muslim community got left out of the process. But I think by not having a chief rabbi figure in the Muslim community, or a cardinal, or an archbishop, by not having an organization like the Board of Deputies or the Conference of Catholic Bishops, etc., there's a huge amount that we do lose, and that needs to be thought about more. And the final point that I want to make was that I think it's not just the conservatives who took this approach of speaking to individuals in the Muslim community. That was already happening during the Labour years as well. So, for example, the idea of, I can't remember what it's called now, working group for young leaders that Hazel Blair set up, women's group that Hazel Blair set up. This is all about sort of reaching beyond the organizations, reaching to the individuals within the Muslim community. So that was already happening before.
Yes, sure. We don't say that there's a radical break between New Labour and the coalition, if only because New Labour zigzagged about. It didn't have one particular approach. And in many ways, moving away from take me to your leader, its main response was, well, this is your leader. Create a few new leaders, because they didn't like the ones that were visible at that time, that were available at that time, or could claim that title. Did either of you want to come in on that?
Just a short point on this sort of change from take me to your leader onwards. I think it was very interesting for us to work through and try to write about that in the representation chapter, because I think there was a movement away from take me to your leader, but I think at the same time there was a kind of mirroring and a kind of fragmentation that's happened as there's been a more pluralization of the different groups which you can ascribe to. And that's not necessarily a great outcome for politics either, in terms of joining together around a common cause. So we argue in this report that you shouldn't necessarily expect one group to be pristinely perfect in representing Muslims, but at the same time, if there are representative claims or sort of policy agendas or something which are important to advance on a broader basis, you should try to find a unified way in which to do that. So we try to do a little bit of footwork in writing about that, but we'd love to continue to debate and think about that topic.
I suppose in the terms of the welcoming the move away from the take me to your leader model, I guess one of the cautionary notes that we're sounding in the report is that there still remains a kind of lack of transparency about the mechanisms of working with which types of representatives on what grounds. So if there were some movement to be had on that particular issue, I think a more transparent system of engagement with Muslim representatives would be necessary. And just one final point, I think, about the Muslim individuals. I'd just like to flag that one part of a lot of the interviews that we had was on the sort of personal biographical sort of reflections on what it meant to be active in governance in public life, was to invite people's reflections on whether or not they felt, or how they might feel about being positioned as Muslims in their public roles. And that generated quite a lot of really interesting data, not least of which is something which Nasser Mir's talked about, which is the politics of being involuntarily Muslim, which is being identified as Muslim in public roles, even if that isn't an identity that you're seeking to claim for yourself. So that's quite interesting data, I think, that came back from some MPs who did not wish to position themselves in those sorts of terms, but sometimes felt a particular kind of pressure to be represented in that kind of way. So lots of parts of the data are exploring some of those quite difficult issues about what it means to be, a Muslim in the public domain and under the glare of public attention.
I'll just make one point, and that is that really welcome the report. I think it's really helpful, a helpful addition to the space, and thank the team for all the hard work. You know, the thing that I think I probably want to emphasize is, you know, there are a lot of tensions that have come up in this discussion, that come up in the report. This point about, for example, what's better, a single representative organization. I think the points that Mohammed Aziz was mentioning are quite important logistical problems that you face when you don't have that type of structure, versus open access and sort of multi-pronged interfacing with government. Other tensions like, you know, problems raised around near neighbors, for example, but then the very real need of organizations at the local level that are looking for funds and looking to do something where, you know, in an environment where there isn't much money available. Do you take prevent money? Do you take other money? Do you take near neighbors money? And so on and so forth. We often want to say things to society, and yet at the same time when society then becomes attentive and shines a spotlight, we sort of say, well, don't put so much attention on us. So there's lots of tensions, natural tensions in the life of any community, and there aren't many spaces where we can discuss those tensions and where we can discuss intra-Muslim as well as inter-community, where we can talk about, debate, argue about, discuss what we'd actually like to do. And, you know, that's my thing from the report, that fine balancing act between the deliberative, thought-through agency that Muslims are exercising versus the things that are happening where Muslims are passive observers and things are being done to them. I'm not sure that balance is right. And how do you redress that balance? And what does the community need? What does the community need in order to shift that balance to a more productive one? Thank you.
Thank you. Mara, do you feel you've had your last word?
I think I'll just say
Okay.
a couple of those, that's okay. First, I'd like to agree with everything you said about the problems of the Conservative Party taking away the only little bit of legislation that we really had to get our teeth into. But what I really just want to say, the difficulty is that legislation has been there, and the Muslim community, I don't think, has really benefited from it adequately or really engaged with it and taken it forward, because when you are a disenfranchised, alienated community, the sort of people on the ground are not able really to develop. It's developing, things are developing for sure, but ordinary people don't understand what this act means for people and how to, if they are being prevented from employment or they're prevented from something, they don't really know fully how to go about getting their rights, so to speak. So there has been small pockets of opportunities for Muslims to use legislation to their advantage, but I don't think that it's really been adequately used. And that is because we don't have an adequate voluntary sector. We are not supported on the ground to enable people to have specialist experiences and professional people working to support communities, which is the norm for all communities. That's what you expect. You expect a vibrant voluntary sector. The voluntary sector is the interface between ordinary people and public policy, government, whatever you want to call it. And that's why I'll just end on why An-Nusra Society with Radical Middle Way have set up a new campaign called the Faith in Khidmah campaign. It's on Facebook, and this is what we want to try and to bridge this, make this link and to fill the vacuum.
Thank you very much. We've come to the end of our time.